Today we'll begin our look at the Gilded Age. Many historians call this period the Second Industrial Revolution, the first being the market revolution of the early 19th century. This period of industrialization is also known as the Gilded Age, named by Mark Twain. He said that all that glitters is not gold. This quote refers to America's outward appearance of opportunity, but underlying problems associated with that growth. The Gilded Age is defined by many different characteristics. First and foremost, it's a period of industrialization. You will see the rise of big business and the rise of the corporation, leading to rapid growth of industry. Next, we will discuss the rapid influx of immigrants and their struggles as they attempt to assimilate into American society. In the next chapter, we will discuss urbanization, or the growth of cities, as an effect of industrialization. Industrialization will lead to erratic economic growth, with many booms and busts, or ups and downs. In response to poor working conditions, we will discuss the rise of labor unions, who attempt to improve conditions for the worker. The elimination of competition will result in a concentration of wealth, creating many super-rich Americans. Finally, this period can be characterized as one filled with corruption. Without government regulation, businesses can do whatever it takes to survive and thrive. GDP, or the gross domestic product, is the total market value of all the goods and services produced within the borders of a nation during a specified period. As you can see from the chart, we move from an agricultural-based economy to a manufacturing one. Let's start with identifying the 7 factors that cause industrialization. The first is labor supply. There were 2 sources of labor. First were the farmers who moved to the city in search of jobs. They left because there were fewer opportunities on the farm because of new inventions that took their jobs. And the large influx of immigrants who came from Southern and Eastern Europe as well as East Asia. Immigrants provided a cheap source of labor. America has an abundance of natural resources that permits us to have such a high standard of living. Some of those resources are coal, iron ore, oil, forests, and water power. New technology, such as the incandescent light bulb, caused industry to grow. For the first time, businesses and factories can work at night. This, of course, will provide an increase in production. Longer hours mean you can produce more. Then, demand increased. As the cities grew, the needs of the cities provided the markets or demand for industrialization. Railroads provided the transportation network to get goods and supplies to and from their source and the cities. The next factor is the role of government. At first, they're going to provide a stable atmosphere for businesses by passing policies that encourage industrialization. Then they're also going to leave businesses alone. This policy is known as laissez-faire. The last factor is venture capital. This is money used for investments and risk-taking on new technologies or ideas. It is usually invested in new businesses, technologies, or stocks. This graph shows the percentage of world manufacturing by nations between 1870 and 1913. Other nations means every other country in the world combined. While Great Britain was the single largest manufacturer in the world by 1870, the U.S. took the lead by 1900. The steel industry developed in the U.S. during the Gilded Age thanks to the Bessemer process. It was the first inexpensive process for the mass production of steel from molten pig iron. It removed the impurities and transformed iron into steel, a stronger and lighter material used for the construction of railroads, bridges, and skyscrapers. The steel industry began in western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio due to the abundance of iron and coal in the region. As a result, Pittsburgh became the center of the steel industry. In 1860, the U.S. only produced 13,000 tons of steel. By 1880, that number soared to 1.4 million. The graph on the left identifies the amount of iron and steel produced by 5 major countries between 1880 and 1914. As you can see, production increases significantly. The year 1914 was chosen because of World War I. These major powers were building up their navies during this period in preparation for war. The graph on the right identifies the amount of steel produced just in the U.S. between 1875 and 1915. By 1915, the U.S. is producing over 35 million tons of steel, far surpassing any other industrial power in the world. The Gilded Age was a period of invention. Thousands of new products were created that changed the lives of Americans forever. Inventions like the telegraph and the telephone revolutionized how Americans communicated over long distances. The completion of the transatlantic cable in 1866 cemented international communication between North America and Europe. Typewriters, cash registers, and adding machines contributed to greater productivity in the workplace, making jobs easier and more efficient. As we learned in the West, the railroad made travel across the country faster and contributed to economic growth. Trolley cars, subways, and elevated trains made travel in congested cities much easier. Americans could now listen to recorded music at home with the phonograph, a record player. The movie camera led to our love of cinema, and cameras allowed us to capture our favorite memories on film. Thomas Edison's light bulb not only changed lighting in our homes but in factories. They can now work around the clock to produce the goods purchased around the country. Since the beginning of the Gilded Age, fossil fuels have been used as a source of energy. Coal was the dominant source of fuel since 1800 and is still used today. Petroleum, or oil, would take over as the most important fuel. It all started in 1846 when Abraham Gessner invented kerosene, which was used in lamps for lighting. Next, in 1859, Edwin Drake invented the first modern drilling process for deep oil wells. Large-scale oil production began in 1901 with the oil strike at Spindletop near Beaumont, Texas. John D. Rockefeller founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870, which held a near monopoly on oil until its breakup in 1911. Over 600,000 U.S. patents are granted during the Gilded Age. Some of the patents were for, but not limited to, the sewing machine, typewriter, telegraph, telephone, light bulb, generator, phonograph, movie camera, airplane, alternating current, automobile, Bessemer process, air brakes, refrigerated railroad cars, cash registers, and adding machines. Cyrus Field helped make the world a little smaller by helping to finance the making of the transatlantic cable in 1866. We can now communicate with Europe in an instant's time. By 1900, cables linked all continents of the world in an electronic network of instantaneous global communication. In his 84 years, Thomas Edison acquired a record number of 1,093 patents and was the driving force behind such innovations as the phonograph, the incandescent light bulb, and one of the earliest motion picture cameras. He also created the world's first industrial research laboratory. Known as the Wizard of Menlo Park for the New Jersey town where he did some of his best-known work, Edison had become one of the most famous men in the world by the time he was in his 30s. In addition to his talent for innovation, Edison was also a successful manufacturer and businessman who was highly skilled at marketing his inventions and himself to the public. Frederick Taylor was the leading theorist pushing his idea of scientific management to improve the workplace. In his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, Taylor outlines 4 major ideas. Number 1, use methods based on a scientific study of the tasks. Number 2, scientifically select, train, and develop each employee. Number 3, provide detailed instruction and supervision of each worker in the performance of their assigned task. And number 4, divide work equally between managers and workers so that managers apply scientific management principles to planning the work and the workers actually perform the tasks. The most important change in production technology was the emergence of the moving assembly line. Assembly lines had been introduced in the early 1800s and was perfected throughout the Industrial Revolution. What made this possible was the introduction of interchangeable parts. These are parts that are identical and can fit in any assembly of the same type. This led to increased productivity of mass-produced goods. On December 1, 1913, Henry Ford installed the first moving assembly line for the mass production of an entire automobile. The moving assembly line is where the product moves along the line and is assembled by stationary workers. His innovation reduced the time it took to build a car from more than 12 hours to 1 hour and 33 minutes. Between 1870 and 1890, the amount of railroad track in the United States tripled, dramatically changing the U.S. Although trains traveled slowly by today's standards, they sped along the tracks more quickly than anyone could have imagined a century before. Trains brought products made in the factories of the East and the Midwest to the rest of the country, and carried farm produce and livestock to urban markets. The Great Northern Railway was built in stages from Duluth, Minnesota to Tacoma, Washington. It had branches that ran north to Canada and other branches that connected to the Iron Range in Minnesota and the copper mines of Montana. It began large-scale shipment of ore to the steel mills of the Midwest in 1898. The Northern Pacific Railroad also ran from Minnesota to Tacoma, Washington. Construction began in 1870 and was completed in 1883. The main activities were shipping wheat and other farm products, cattle, timber, and minerals, bringing in consumer goods, transporting passengers, and selling land. The Southern Pacific Railroad Company began in 1865 as a land holding company. By 1900, it was a major railroad system that extended from New Orleans to Sacramento, California, traveling through Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico Territory, Arizona, and California. Shipping and railroad tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt was a self-made multimillionaire who became one of the wealthiest Americans of the 19th century. As a boy, he worked with his father, who operated a boat that ferried cargo between Staten Island, New York, where they lived, and Manhattan. After working as a steamship captain, Vanderbilt went into business for himself in the late 1820s and eventually became one of the country's largest steamship operators. In the process, the Commodore, as he was publicly nicknamed, gained a reputation for being fiercely competitive and ruthless. In the 1860s, he shifted his focus to the railroad industry, where he built another empire and helped make railroad transportation more efficient. When Vanderbilt died, he was worth more than $100 million.